The light in Lowe's Angels possessed a particular magic in the early evenings, a soft, honeyed glow that gilded the edges of everything it touched. From her favorite armchair by the living room window, Erica Adams watched it wash over the potted succulents on her balcony, turning their geometric forms into amber sculptures. This was her quiet hour, the space between the productive hum of her workday and the warm comfort of the evening ahead. In this light, her life felt not just good, but composed, a masterpiece of contentment she had somehow been lucky enough to curate. Her world was built upon two pillars, each solid and beloved. Mark, her husband of 7 years whose laugh still sounded like home. He was an architect, a man who built tangible things, and he had built this life with her, brick by brick of shared dreams and inside jokes. Then there was Chloe, her best friend for over a decade, a sister by choice rather than blood. Chloe was the vibrant splash of color to Erica's more considered palette, a freelance photographer whose energy could light up any room. The three of them formed a perfect, equilibrated triangle, their lives seamlessly interwoven through weekly dinners, spontaneous weekend hikes, and a text thread that was a constant, comforting heartbeat on her phone. Erica's own craft was in the intangible. As a graphic designer, she shaped perceptions for a living, arranging pixels into messages that were clear, compelling, and beautiful. Her eye was trained to notice the slight misalignment of text, the subtle discord of a clashing font, the way negative space could either breathe life into a composition or suffocate it. She prided herself on this observational acuity, this ability to see the tiny fissures in a design that others might miss. It was a skill she applied with ruthless precision to her work, ensuring every project that left her desk was flawless. Yet she never thought to turn that scrutinizing gaze inward onto the canvas of her own existence. Why would she? The picture was so evidently perfect. She could recall the previous Thursday with crystalline clarity. The three of them around her reclaimed oak dining table, a spread of Mark's famous mushroom risotto between them. Chloe had been recounting a disastrous client shoot, her hands flying dramatically as she described a persnickety bride. Mark had interjected with a deadpan comment, so perfectly timed it had sent Erica into a fit of laughter that made her ribs ache. The sound had mingled with the soft jazz from the speaker and the clink of their wine glasses, a symphony of uncomplicated joy. In moments like that, Erica felt a profound sense of arrival, as if she had navigated to exactly the coordinates where she was always meant to be. Their routines were the gentle rhythms that anchored her. Sunday morning farmers market trips with Chloe, hunting for heirloom tomatoes and fresh flowers. Late-night conversations with Mark in their darkened bedroom, whispers about future vacations and mundane worries that melted away in the safety of the shared dark. Even her work-from-home days had a serene pattern, the focused silence of her sunlit studio, punctuated by the ping of a message from Chloe or a midday call from Mark just to say hello. She was a woman who appreciated structure, and her life was a beautifully structured design. Sitting there as the golden light deepened into twilight, Erica reflected on this comfort. She had always been a watcher, a noticer. It was why she was good at her job. She could deconstruct a logo, a layout, a brand identity, and pinpoint the exact element that made it sing or fall flat. But her personal life was not a project to be deconstructed. It was a finished piece, hanging in the gallery of her happiness, to be admired and lived within. The details she noticed, there were only the endearing ones. The way Mark always squeezed the toothpaste tube from the middle, the specific cadence of Chloe's sigh when she was stressed, the comforting weight of the ceramic mug she used every morning for her coffee. She took a slow sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her chest. Outside, the city began to sparkle, a mirror of the stars beginning to pierce the violet sky. The familiar sound of Mark's key in the front door was a promise of continuity. Soon he would come in, drop his bag by the console table with a familiar thud, and press a kiss to the top of her head. Later, a text from Chloe would likely arrive, a funny meme or a voice note dissecting her day. This was her ecosystem, balanced and thriving. Erica's talent lay in spotting cracks, but in the architecture of her own world, she saw only seamless, solid walls built with trust and time. She had no reason, not a single one, to look for faults. The picture was too perfect to question, a masterpiece she believed was painted in permanent, fade-proof ink. Her observant nature was a tool reserved for her profession, a lens she happily removed when she stepped away from her screen and into the warm, unquestioned embrace of her life. The first fissure appeared on a Saturday, disguised as sunlight and the scent of coffee. It was their standing weekend brunch, a ritual Erica cherished. The restaurant patio was dappled with shade from sprawling ficus trees, and the air hummed with the pleasant chatter of other couples and friend groups enjoying their leisure. Mark sat across from her, his menu open, but his attention was elsewhere. His phone, face down on the white tablecloth, emitted a series of rapid, muffled buzzes, vibrating against the ceramic like an angry insect. Erica watched, her own menu forgotten. Mark's hand descended, a quick, practiced motion to silence the device. His fingers lingered for a half-second too long, a subtle press that seemed to will the noise into oblivion. He didn't flip it over to check the screen. He didn't offer an eye roll and a comment about an impatient client. He simply silenced it and looked up, a smile appearing on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes, which held a faint, rigid tension. "Work," he said, the single word a dismissal. He reached for his water glass, and Erica noted the tightness in his knuckles, the slight stiffness in his shoulders as he took a sip. It was a posture of containment, as if he were holding something volatile inside. The phone buzzed again, a shorter, insistent burst. This time his reaction was faster, almost a flinch. He silenced it again, his thumb jabbing at the side button with a hint of irritation or perhaps guilt. "On a Saturday?" Erica asked, keeping her tone light, conversational. She aimed for the easy sympathy she usually felt when his job intruded on their time. "Big project timeline moved up," he said, his gaze drifting over her shoulder toward the restaurant entrance, as if scanning for someone. "It's a hassle." The explanation was plausible. Mark's firm was competitive and deadlines were sacred, but the delivery was off. It was too smooth, too rehearsed, lacking the genuine, grumbling frustration that usually accompanied such interruptions. The phone lay between them like a dormant accusation. Erica felt a tiny, cold pinprick in the warm fabric of the morning, a sensation so alien she almost dismissed it. She was being paranoid. This was Mark, her Mark. He built things, solid and true. She pushed the feeling down, burying it under a deliberate focus on the menu's descriptions of avocado toast and poached eggs. The rest of the meal proceeded with a veneer of normalcy. They talked about maybe catching a film later, about the new exhibit at the Broad. But Erica's observational lens, usually so comfortably switched off in his presence, had been inadvertently nudged. She noticed how his phone remained resolutely face down. She saw the way his eyes flicked to it every few minutes, a quick, subconscious check. She registered the faint, distracted quality of his laughter at her joke about the mimosa being mostly orange juice. The crack was microscopic, but once noticed, it seemed to catch the light from a new, unsettling angle. Later that afternoon, the second hairline fracture appeared, this time from Chloe. They had a standing movie night, a holdover from their college days involving terrible horror films and expensive ice cream. Erica was already in her softest sweats, the freezer stocked with mint chocolate chip when her phone rang. Chloe's name illuminated the screen. "Erica, hi." Chloe's voice was bright, effervescent, a tone usually reserved for exciting news or particularly juicy gossip. "I am so sorry, but I have to bail. A total work crisis just erupted. A client is demanding a last-minute reshoot for a catalogue tomorrow morning at dawn in Malibu. It's a nightmare." The words were apologetic, but the melody behind them was all wrong. The brightness in Chloe's voice lacked the underlying strain of genuine stress. It sounded incongruously like excitement. Erica could almost picture her, not frazzled and annoyed, but perhaps animated, energized. "At the beach, at dawn?" Erica asked, trying to match her friend's tone. "That sounds dramatic. Tell me about it," Chloe said, and there was a laugh, a light, airy sound that felt disconnected from the complaint. "I'll be a zombie tomorrow. Rain check, promise." "Of course," Erica said, the words automatic. "Good luck with the sunrise." After the call ended, Erica stood in her quiet living room, the empty couch seeming to mock her, the details assembled in her mind, a disjointed mood board. Mark's tense silencing of the phone, his distracted, guilty posture, Chloe's oddly cheerful cancellation, a last-minute shoot on a Saturday evening. The prickle of dissonance returned, sharper this time, a static charge on her skin. Her mind, that skilled editor, tried to arrange the pieces into a harmless narrative. Coincidence, work pressures, the unpredictable demands of creative careers, but the alignment felt forced. The colors clashed. A small, insistent voice, the one she used when critiquing a flawed layout, whispered that the composition was wrong. The negative space between their excuses held a shape she couldn't yet name. Erica shook her head, physically trying to dislodge the suspicion. This was her husband and her best friend, the two people who formed the cornerstone of her happiness. To scrutinize them felt like a betrayal in itself, a violation of the trust that was the bedrock of everything. She chastised herself fiercely for the paranoia, attributing it to her own overactive, detail-oriented mind, turning its tools on the wrong canvas. She told herself she was seeing ghosts in the pixelation, inventing narratives where there were only mundane, inconvenient truths. She put the ice cream away, turned off the TV, and decided to have an early night, determined to reset her perspective. The cracks were surely just a trick of the light, a smudge on the surface of her perfect picture that a little faith could wipe clean. But the seed of doubt, tiny and tenacious, had been planted in the fertile soil of her observance, and in the silent dark of her bedroom, she felt its first invisible root take hold. Erica fought the creeping unease with the only weapon she trusted: work. The demanding design project for a new eco-friendly skincare brand became her sanctuary, a digital universe where she controlled every element. She lost herself in the meticulous selection of a serene sage green, the crafting of a leaf motif that felt organic but not cliché, the careful kerning of a clean, modern font. For hours, the only sounds were the soft click of her mouse and the whisper of her stylus on the tablet, a meditative rhythm meant to drown out the quiet questions scratching at the back of her mind. She told herself the brunch tension and Chloe's cancellation were isolated incidents, fragments of bad timing that her over-analytical nature was weaving into a false pattern. The screen before her, with its orderly layers and defined objectives, was a testament to a world where things could be corrected, aligned, and perfected. Her real life, she insisted, was already perfect. Night fell, wrapping the city in a velvet dark punctuated by distant amber streetlights. Mark had been quiet all evening, citing fatigue from his supposed work crisis. He'd retreated to the living room with a book, but Erica, passing by the doorway, noticed the pages rarely turned. His stillness felt heavy, preoccupied. She returned to her studio, tweaking gradients until her eyes burned, a self-imposed penance for her own disloyal thoughts. It was well past midnight when she finally shut down her computer, the house now steeped in a profound silence. She moved through the darkened rooms toward their bedroom, expecting to find Mark asleep. Their bed was empty, the covers undisturbed. A faint, cold draft led her to the glass doors of the master balcony, which were slightly ajar. The sheer curtain lifted and fell like a ghostly breath. Through the fabric, she saw the dim outline of Mark's back, his silhouette framed against the night sky. He was outside, and he was speaking, his voice a low, urgent murmur barely audible over the distant hum of the city. Erica froze, her hand on the doorframe. She wasn't eavesdropping. She was stranded in the doorway, captivated by the secretive cadence of a tone she'd never heard him use, a conspiratorial whisper, strained and intimate. She caught only one phrase, carried inside on an eddy of the cool breeze. "I know, but we have to be careful." The words were clear, a shard of ice driven into the warm night. Then silence. A moment later, the soft electronic chime of a call ending. She watched his shoulders slump, a posture of exhaustion or relief, before he turned and slid the door open fully, jumping slightly when he saw her standing there. "Erica, you're up." His voice was now normal volume but tight, a rubber band stretched thin. "Who was that?" she asked, her own voice surprisingly steady. "Is everything okay?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she knew meant stress, but it seemed performed now, an actor hitting his mark. "It was my mom," he said, stepping past her into the bedroom, not meeting her eyes. "She's been having some concerns about her blood pressure again. The doctor adjusted her medication and she's just anxious, calling at all hours. You know how she gets." He was already climbing into bed, his movements hurried, final. Erica stood rooted to the spot. His mother, Helen, was a lovely, robust woman in her 70s who gardened vigorously and took brisk morning walks. She was pragmatic, not prone to anxious midnight calls. The story felt assembled from spare parts, a hasty cover. The phrase, "we have to be careful," echoed in Erica's mind. Who was we? Why did care need to be taken? Care about what? About Helen's health? That made no sense. The explanation was a hollow shell, a poorly designed facade that her professional eye instantly deconstructed. She slid into bed beside him, the space between them charged with the unsaid. He feigned sleep almost immediately, his breathing too deliberately even. Erica stared at the ceiling, the shadows there morphing into vague, troubling shapes. The seed of doubt, planted during the brunch and watered by Chloe's odd cancellation, now split open with a vicious, silent vigor. It was no longer a tiny, ignorable thing. It had roots, and they were digging deep, twisting around the foundations of her certainty. Her husband, the man whose body she knew as well as her own, was lying to her. The content of the lie was less important in that moment than the simple, devastating fact of its existence. The perfect picture on her mental gallery wall developed a crack so central it threatened to shatter the entire glass. That night, sleep did not come. Instead, she lay awake in the dark, her mind, that cursed and gifted tool, now fully engaged, no longer observing her life from a distance but dissecting it, piece by terrible piece, searching for the truth in the negative spaces between his words. The world did not shatter overnight. Instead, it grew a film, a subtle distortion like grease on a camera lens, warping familiar scenes into something faintly sinister. Erica moved through her days with a new, terrible awareness. Her observational nature, once a professional asset, turned inward as a relentless, unforgiving curse. Every interaction became a text to be analyzed, every glance a potential symbol in a code she was desperate, and yet terrified, to crack. The first concrete oddity arrived via text from Chloe, a breezy message about a new boutique called Velvet Canyon that had opened in Silver Lake. "You have to see the ceramics," Chloe wrote. "Totally your aesthetic. We should go this weekend." Erica, who prided herself on knowing every emerging design spot in the city, had never heard of it. A quick search revealed a sleek, minimalist website, exactly the sort of place she would normally have bookmarked instantly. The oversight felt personal, a small tear in the fabric of their shared world. She mentioned it to Mark that evening as they chopped vegetables for a stir-fry, a casual test. Chloe's raving about some new place in Silver Lake. Velvet Canyon, know it? Mark's knife hesitated for a fraction of a second on the cutting board. "Oh yeah," he said, not looking up from the bell peppers. "Drove past it the other day, looks pricey." The casual reference was a perfectly weighted stone that sank straight through her chest. He had driven past it. Mark, who navigated the city on a well-worn circuit between home, work, and his favorite climbing gym, who complained about Silver Lake's impossible parking. The coincidence was a bright, flashing pixel in the corrupted image. Then came the dinner party at Liam and Sophia's. It was a typical gathering, all soft lighting and shared platters, but Erica attended as a spy in her own life. She watched. She saw Mark from across the room catch Chloe's eye and give a barely perceptible shake of his head as Chloe reached for a second glass of wine. It was a tiny motion, intimate and proprietary, a silent communication that bypassed the room's chatter entirely. Chloe's hand withdrew as if the bottle were hot. Later, when Sophia told a long, meandering story about a vacation mishap, Erica saw Mark and Chloe share a glance, not of shared amusement at the tale, but a quick, secretive look that seemed to say, "Can you believe we have to sit through this?" It was a look of collusion, a private island in the middle of the social sea. The air between them seemed to vibrate with a frequency Erica could not hear but could feel in her bones, a hum of unspoken meaning. Erica's catalogue of dissonance grew, a morbid collection. She noted how Chloe had started using a new phrase, absolute madness, that Mark had adopted the week prior. She registered the way Mark now scrolled past his phone notifications with a swift, sweeping motion, never letting them linger on the screen. She saw the fresh succulent on Chloe's balcony, a rare Howarthia cooperary, identical to the one Mark had surprised Erica with a month ago, claiming he'd found it at a pop-up market downtown. Were their lives not just interwoven, but now replicating, echoing in this eerie, synchronized way? Her own home became a gallery of suspicions. The comfortable silence she once shared with Mark now felt loaded, a tense ceasefire. His compliments on her cooking felt like practiced lines. His habitual kiss on her forehead when he left for work seemed to hang in the air after he was gone, a ghost of a gesture that had once been solid and warm. She found herself studying the timeline of her own recent past, re-examining events with this new, poisoned perspective. Chloe's work trip to Santa Barbara in February had Mark been unusually preoccupied that weekend. The weekend Erica had visited her sister in San Diego had the text thread with Chloe been unusually quiet. Her mind, her precise, analytical mind, had become a torture chamber. It would not stop. It cross-referenced dates, tonality, absences. It highlighted inconsistencies with the vicious red pen of a ruthless editor. The blessing of her perception had become a relentless curse, forcing her to see the shifting shadows where before she had only seen light. Sleep became a fragmented landscape of half-dreams, where whispered conversations melted into the sound of rain. She moved through her design work with mechanical efficiency, her creativity sapped, all her mental energy diverted to the single, exhausting task of scrutiny. The worst moments were the ones of near normalcy. When the three of them managed a Friday pizza night, the old rhythm would almost reassert itself. A joke, a familiar complaint about traffic, the simple act of passing the Parmesan. For a few minutes the film would clear. and she could see the beloved outlines of her friend and her husband. Then Mark would tell a story and slightly misremember a detail Chloe had originally shared, or Chloe would reference a movie she and Mark had supposedly watched together during one of Erica's late work nights, and the distortion would seep back in, thicker and darker than before. The love she felt for them was still there, but it was now tangled with vines of doubt, each new discovery a thorn that drew blood. She was trapped in a cruel paradox. To ignore the clues was to betray her own intelligence, to live a willfully blind life in a house of mirrors. To acknowledge them was to invite a cataclysm, to risk demolishing the very structure that sheltered her. So she catalogued. She observed. She collected the misplaced words and the strained smiles like grim evidence, each one a weight added to the invisible burden she now carried everywhere. The shadows in her perfect life had not just lengthened. They had taken on substance and form, moving just at the edge of her vision, whispering that the world she trusted was an exquisite, carefully maintained forgery. The suspicion became a physical presence, a cold, hard knot lodged just beneath Erica's sternum that tightened with every shared glance, every too convenient excuse. It lived with her, a silent third party at dinner, a whisper in the dark when Mark's breathing evened into sleep. The collected oddities, the mirrored phrases, the secretive looks, the hollow explanation on the balcony, were like scattered puzzle pieces from a box whose picture she dreaded to see complete. Her mind, that relentless archivist, had assembled a case built on circumstantial shadows. She needed something tangible, something made of data and digital footprints, not just intuition and wounded pride. She needed to silence the screaming maybe with a definitive yes or no. The opportunity presented itself on a Tuesday. Mark had an early site visit, a 2-hour drive to a coastal development. He left in the pre-dawn gloom, kissing her cheek with lips that felt like a stranger's. The house settled into a profound quiet, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Erica went through the motions of her morning, brewing coffee, opening her laptop in her studio. But the design files on her screen were a blur. The knot in her chest had migrated to her hands, which trembled slightly as she placed her mug down. This was the line, the irrevocable border between trust and investigation. Crossing it meant admitting the war was real. She stared at the closed door of Mark's small, tidy home office, a room she rarely entered. His laptop would be in there, a sleek silver device that contained the blueprints of his professional life, and perhaps the evidence of his personal betrayal. For hours she wrestled with herself. The voice of her old self, the woman from the perfect picture, pleaded that this was a violation, a poison that would taint everything regardless of what she found. The voice of the new, watchful creature she had become countered coldly. The poison was already in the water. She was just seeking the source. As evening fell and Mark texted he was running late, stuck in traffic, the decision crystallized. The fear of knowing was finally surpassed by the agony of not knowing. She waited until full dark, until the logical time for him to be home had passed and the house felt like a sealed vault. She moved down the hallway, her bare feet silent on the polished concrete. The door to his office was unlocked. The room smelled of him, his sandalwood soap, the faint, clean scent of drafting paper. His laptop sat centered on the minimalist desk, a dormant monolith. Her breath hitched as she lifted the lid. The screen glowed to life, demanding a password. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the first gate. She typed in the password she knew, the one they had laughingly set years ago, a combination of their old college nicknames. The desktop bloomed into view, a serene photograph of the Joshua tree. Night sky. For a dizzying second she felt a surge of relief. It was his familiar world. Her movements were clumsy, her fingers feeling thick and alien on the trackpad. She went straight to his email client, the most obvious vault. She scanned the inbox, her eyes darting over subject lines about permit approvals, contractor bids, material invoices, nothing personal. She checked the sent folder, the drafts, all clean, all professional. The knot in her chest loosened a fraction, allowing a shallow breath. Perhaps she was insane. Perhaps her talent for spotting flaws had metastasized into a sickness that saw betrayal in every shadow. Then, almost as an afterthought, she opened his web browser. It was a force of habit, a designer's instinct to check the history for inspiration or research trails. The history menu dropped down. It was empty. Not just sparse, but meticulously, completely empty. A cold, sharp clarity cut through the remaining fog of her doubt. Mark was not a tech-savvy man. He used the internet as a tool, a blunt instrument. He left digital breadcrumbs everywhere. Tabs open for weeks for restaurants he meant to try. Search histories full of random questions about roof load capacities, and the best hiking trails near Big Sur. He never, ever cleared his history. He once called the practice paranoid. The pristine emptiness of that browser history was a scream in the silent room. It was an act of deliberate concealment, a digital wiping of the slate that was entirely, profoundly out of character for the man she thought she knew. She closed the laptop lid, the soft click echoing in the quiet office. The trembling in her hands had spread through her entire body. The negative space had spoken. The absence of data was now the most damning piece of evidence she possessed. He was hiding something. The careful, periodic erasure of his digital trail was the behavior of someone with something to lose, someone constructing an alibi of normalcy, one cleared cache at a time. The perfect picture was not just cracked. It was revealed to be a digital composite, a clever forgery. And she now had the first chilling pixel of proof. She retreated to the living room, sitting in her armchair in the dark, waiting for the sound of his key in the lock, a spy now in her own home, armed with a truth that felt more like a weapon. The cleared browser history was a ghost, a negative space that screamed of deliberate erasure. It haunted Erica through a sleepless night, as Mark slept the untroubled sleep of the unexposed beside her. In the grey light of dawn, a new, more concrete avenue presented itself, one she had never before considered: the phone bill. They shared a family plan, a mundane administrative detail Mark handled, with paperless statements sent to his email. It was a ledger of their shared life, itemized and cold. If the digital trail on his laptop had been wiped, perhaps the financial trail had been overlooked. Accessing it required a different kind of trespass. She waited until Mark left for work, then sat at her own computer, her stomach a tight coil of dread. She navigated to the carrier's website, clicked forgot password, and requested a reset link to his email, the same email whose password she knew. It felt like picking a lock in slow motion. The reset link arrived. She created a new password, her fingers clumsy on the keys. The dashboard loaded, bland and bureaucratic. She selected the most recent billing cycle. The PDF opened, a stark list of numbers and times. Her own activity was a short, predictable column: calls to her mother, her sister, a few clients. Chloe's number appeared several times, always in the afternoon, durations between 12 and 20 minutes, their usual check-ins. Then she found Mark's section. At first it looked normal: calls to his office, to his project manager, to his climbing gym. But as her eyes scanned down the list, a pattern emerged, glowing with malevolent significance. A specific phone number not saved as a contact appeared with relentless frequency. The calls always occurred late, between 10:45 p.m. and 1:30 a.m., when he'd claimed to be reading or already asleep. Their durations were lengthy: 34 minutes, 47 minutes, once a staggering hour, and 12 minutes. Whispered conversations in the dark. Beneath the call log, the text message tally showed hundreds of texts exchanged with that same number, a constant digital heartbeat thrumming beneath the surface of their days. Erica's vision tunneled. The numbers on the screen blurred into a swarm of black insects. She noted the dates: the weekend of her sister's visit in San Diego, a spike; the evening of her supposed work retreat last month, another; the night of the balcony whisper, a 40-minute call logged at 12:18 a.m. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was quantifiable, a spreadsheet of betrayal. The world did not so much tilt as it dissolved at the edges, the familiar contours of her kitchen, melting into a meaningless wash of color and light. She gripped the edge of the desk, anchoring herself to the physical. She needed a name. The number was a cipher, and she had to decode it. With a mechanical detachment that felt alien, she opened a new tab and navigated to a people search site she'd used once years before to find an old classmate. Her hands were steady now, cold and precise. She entered the 10 digits into the search field and hit enter. The page loaded, a spinning wheel, then a result. It was not a surprise. The confirmation was a seismic settling, a final, terrible piece slotting into place with an almost audible click. The number was registered to Chloe Elizabeth Vance, her best friend, her sister by choice, the vibrant splash of color in her life. The world did not shatter, it simply reconfigured itself into a colder, harder, truer shape. The shared glances, the mirrored phrases, the boutique, the cancelled plans, all of it snapped into a devastating, obvious alignment. The perfect triangle was a lie. It had always been a line, a direct connection between Mark and Chloe, with Erica orbiting uselessly on the periphery, a blind satellite to their private planet. The love she felt for them did not vanish. It curdled instantly into something viscous and toxic, a compound of grief, rage, and a profound, humiliating foolishness. She had been the audience to their secret duet, applauding the performance of her own life. She closed the browser tabs, one by one, as if sealing tombs. She logged out of the carrier's website. She sat in the silent, sunlit kitchen, the proof now a living thing inside her, a second, bitter heart. The digital trail had ended here, at this absolute, unassailable truth. The axis of her world had not just tilted. It had been permanently, irrevocably wrenched from its foundation. Everything she had believed was real was a fiction, and she was alone at the center of the empty set, holding the cold, hard script of their deception. The knowledge was a stone in her shoe, a constant, grating presence that made every step an agony. Erica carried it for 2 days, moving through her routines like a ghost, haunting her own life. She designed logos with hands that felt detached from her body, ate meals she could not taste, and listened to Mark's stories about work with a smile that was a stiff, painted-on mask. The proof was a corrosive acid in her veins, and she knew she could not contain it indefinitely. It would leak out, or it would consume her from within. She needed to lance the wound, to see the confirmation not in data on a screen, but in the flesh and blood face of the woman she had loved as a sister. She needed to hear the lie from Chloe's own mouth, to watch the betrayal animate her features. Only then could the fracture become absolute, a clean break she could navigate. She chose a neutral public place, a quiet coffee shop in Los Feliz with large windows and a hum of ambient chatter that promised privacy within a crowd. She texted Chloe, the words bland and harmless on her screen. "Hey, feeling a bit stir-crazy. Can you grab a quick coffee this afternoon? Need to talk about something." The vagueness was a deliberate hook. Chloe replied almost instantly with a cheerful, "Of course, everything okay." The concern felt like a performance already underway. Erica arrived early, claiming a small table in a corner. She positioned herself so the light from the window would fall directly on Chloe's face. She ordered a tea she did not want and waited, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. When Chloe breezed in, wearing a flowing linen dress and a wide, easy smile, Erica felt a physical pang. She looked like her best friend. She looked like home. For a dizzying second, Erica wanted to abandon the whole terrible plan, to bury the evidence and live in the beautiful lie. "Hey you," Chloe said, sliding into the chair opposite and dropping her bag. "What's up? You sounded mysterious." Her eyes were bright, searching Erica's face with what seemed like genuine curiosity. Erica took a slow sip of her tea, buying time, letting the silence stretch just a beat too long. She watched Chloe's smile falter ever so slightly at the edges. "Oh, just feeling a bit out of the loop lately," Erica began, her voice carefully light. "Work's been intense, and I feel like I'm missing things. You mentioned that new boutique, Velvet Canyon, the other day. I'd never even heard of it. Made me realize I need to get out more." She kept her gaze steady on Chloe's face. She saw it, a flicker, swift as a minnow in a clear stream. A tiny dilation of the pupils, a quick unconscious tightening at the corner of her mouth. Panic instantly suppressed. "Oh, it's super new," Chloe said, her tone breezy but a fraction too high. "I only found it because I was shooting a lookbook for a client right next door. Total accident. The ceramics are insane though. We should definitely go." The excuse was plausible, but it was delivered with an over-elaborate casualness, a dancer adding unnecessary flourishes to a simple step. Erica nodded, as if satisfied. She let another moment of silence hang, watching Chloe's fingers fiddle with the paper sleeve of her unused straw. "How's work been for you?" Erica asked, tilting her head. "You've had so many late nights recently. Those last-minute shoots sound brutal." Chloe's eyes flicked away toward the window. "It's been crazy," she said, the word crazy coming out in a rushed sigh. "Just one of those cycles, you know. Clients have no concept of time. I was up until 2 a.m. on a conference call last Tuesday with a studio in New York. It's exhausting." She leaned forward, a gesture of conspiratorial commiseration. "How's Mark handling his crunch? You two surviving?" The pivot was deft, a redirect back to safe, shared territory. But the mention of the late-night call, a specific, unnecessary detail, was another flourish. Erica felt the stone in her shoe grind into bone. She decided to apply the gentlest pressure, a test of the fault line. "He's managing," Erica said softly, her eyes never leaving Chloe's. "Though he's been on his phone a lot at all hours too, must be contagious. I saw the bill, so many late calls. I hope his mom is okay." The change in Chloe's complexion was subtle but definitive. A wash of pallor beneath her light foundation, a stillness that replaced her usual animated posture. The air between them seemed to crystallize. Chloe's gaze dropped to her hands, then darted back up, a trapped animal seeking an exit. His mom, yeah, she murmured, her voice losing its buoyant sheen. Family stuff is so hard. She offered nothing more, no follow-up question, no shared worry about Helen. The absence was louder than any lie. In that quiet, sun-dappled corner, amidst the gentle clatter of cups and the murmur of strangers, the friendship fractured. Erica did not need to accuse her outright. She did not need to brandish the phone records like a weapon. The confirmation was in the flicker of panic, the overly elaborate excuses, the palpable tension that now vibrated between them where easy comfort had lived for over a decade. Chloe knew that Erica knew. The understanding passed between them in the loaded silence, a transaction of pure, painful truth. Chloe's face underwent a final, subtle transformation. The mask of cheerful best friend slipped, revealing not guilt or remorse, but a weary, defensive resignation. She did not try to explain further. She simply looked at Erica, and in her eyes was the acknowledgement of a shared history now irrevocably poisoned. "I should probably go," Chloe said, her voice flat. I have that thing." Erica nodded, her own throat too tight for words. She watched Chloe gather her bag, the movement stiff and hurried. No hug, no casual talk later. Just a final, fleeting glance that held a universe of ruined things. And then she was walking away, out the door and into the afternoon light, leaving Erica alone at the small table. The conversation was over. The echo of their years-long friendship had been confronted, and in its place was only a hollow, ringing silence. The fracture was now complete, a chasm carved in the span of a few careful sentences and the unspoken truths that hung between them, heavier than any spoken accusation. The days after the coffee shop congealed into a thick grey fog. Erica moved through them as an automaton, her body performing the rituals of a life whose meaning had drained away. She woke showered, dressed in soft, neutral fabrics that felt like costumes. She sat at her studio desk, the large monitor glowing with half-finished designs, a logo for a boutique hotel, a website layout for a mindfulness app. Her hands moved the mouse, adjusted anchor points on vector curves, selected palettes of serene blues and muted terracotta. But the connection between her eye, her mind, and her heart was severed. She was a skilled technician going through the motions, assembling pretty, empty shells. The work that had once been a sanctuary of control now felt like a cruel parody. She could align pixels to perfection, yet the fundamental composition of her own existence was a chaotic, ugly smear. Grief and rage existed within her not as separate storms, but as a single, toxic atmosphere. It was a silent, pressurized chamber. The grief was for the lost years, the inside jokes now poisoned, the future vacations that would never be planned, the absolute certainty that had been her emotional flaw. The rage was a cold, sharp shard of glass rotating in her gut, aimed at the two architects of this void. They moved through her world now as grotesque puppets, their every action a performance in a play she had been forced to watch from a new, painful distance. She observed them with a clinical, devastating clarity. Mark cooking dinner one evening, humming a tune she didn't recognize. She watched his hands, the same hands that had held hers during. A scary flight, now chopping an onion with a casual efficiency that felt like a betrayal. She imagined those hands sending a text to Chloe, perhaps a joke about the mundane domesticity he was performing for his oblivious wife. She saw the way he now left his phone face up on the kitchen counter, a bold display of having nothing to hide, a tactic so transparent it made her teeth ache. His solicitousness, asking about her day with exaggerated interest, felt like a scripted line from a bad drama. She would answer in monosyllables, watching his relief when the interaction was over. Chloe was a ghost in the digital machine, a presence felt only through absence. The shared text thread, once a vibrant stream of memes, links, and voice notes, was a barren wasteland. The silence from that quarter was a scream. Erica found herself scrolling through their old messages, a masochistic archaeology, looking for the turning point she had missed. She saw a photo from 8 months ago. The three of them at a beach bonfire, faces illuminated by firelight, smiling. Chloe's arm was slung around Mark's shoulders, her head tilted toward his. At the time, Erica had seen a friend's casual affection. Now she saw a claim staked. Every memory was retroactively vandalized. She saw their clandestine communication not as a secret, but as a cruel, ongoing performance staged for an audience of one, her. The late-night call Mark took on the balcony, his voice a low murmur she could no longer hear, but could perfectly imagine. The text notification that would make his phone glow on his nightstand, followed by the subtle, deliberate stillness of him not checking it until he thought she was asleep. It was a dance of concealment so intricate it felt practiced, a routine they had polished over months. She was the hollow center around which their deception orbited, the empty space that gave their secret shape. The hollow center began to define her. At the grocery store, she would stand before a display of artisanal pasta, a product Chloe loved, and feel a physical wave of nausea. She would pass the Italian restaurant where they'd celebrated her last promotion and feel nothing but a cold void where warm pride had once lived. Her own reflection in shop windows seemed unfamiliar, a woman with careful posture and shadowed eyes, going through the motions of living. The cold rage provided a brittle structure. It told her that grief was a luxury she could not yet afford. The proof she had, the phone records, the digital silence, the confirmed look in Chloe's eyes, was real, but it was her word against a potential united front of gaslighting. "You're imagining things, you're stressed, we would never." She could hear their potential denials, smooth and reasonable, designed to make her doubt her own sanity. The stone-cold certainty in her heart was not enough for a confrontation that would dismantle her life. She needed irrefutable, tangible, undeniable proof, something that could not be explained away as paranoia or a misunderstanding, something that would force the truth into the light so brightly that no shadow of doubt could remain. The decision crystallized one evening as she watched Mark laugh at something on his phone, a quick, private smile touching his lips before he noticed her gaze and wiped it clean. In that moment, the hollow center filled with a single, clear purpose. She would not confront him with accusations. She would not plead or cry. She would become the architect of the truth's revelation. She would gather evidence with the same meticulous care she applied to her designs. She would plan, and she would wait, and she would trap the truth in a moment so unambiguous it would stand like a monument in the ruins of their marriage. The automaton had a directive. The fog lifted, not into sunlight but into the cold, clear air of a hunter's morning. She would give them just enough rope, and she would watch from her new distance as they fashioned it into the noose that would end the performance forever. The plan formed with a cold, crystalline clarity, a stark design laid over the chaotic wreckage of her emotions. Erica's meticulous nature, once the engine of her creativity and now the instrument of her torment, shifted into a new, ruthless gear. She was no longer a victim collecting clues. She was a strategist engineering a confrontation. The irrefutable proof she needed could not be found in digital trails or loaded glances. It had to be witnessed, a scene of such unambiguous betrayal that no denial could survive it. She would have to see them together in the space they had violated, and she would have to catch them in the unguarded intimacy they thought was their secret. The logistics presented themselves with a grim practicality. Her firm occasionally held weekend retreats for major project kickoffs, though none were scheduled. It was a believable cover. On Thursday evening, as they ate a silent dinner of takeout Thai, she cleared her throat. The sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "I have to go to Santa Barbara this weekend," she said, keeping her eyes on her green curry. "The Ventura Point Resort project, last-minute planning retreat. Simon just sprung it on us today." Simon was her creative director, a man known for his chaotic scheduling. The lie slipped out smooth and practiced, a performance that made her own skin crawl. Mark looked up from his phone, his expression rock among the plants she had lovingly tended. The stage was set. The players were in place, though two of them did not know they were performing for an audience of one. Erica, the director of this terrible final act, closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to steady herself for the watchful, lonely vigil of the day to come. The sting was set. All that remained was for the targets to walk into it, confident in their secret, unaware that the silent, hollow center of their world was now watching, waiting, and holding the key to their exposure. The vigil began in the late afternoon, the sun a low, accusing eye on the western horizon. Erica sat in her car, parked beneath the dappled shade of a magnolia tree 3 houses down from her own. The seat was reclined just enough to suggest vacancy, a coffee cup from a chain she never frequented sitting in the holder, part of her anonymous disguise. She wore large sunglasses and a baseball cap, her hair tucked up, feeling both ridiculous and deadly serious. The house looked back at her, a serene, mid-century box of glass and pale wood that held every memory of her adult life. Now it was a stage set, and she was in the darkened audience, waiting for the actors to take their places. Her phone showed 5:47 p.m. Mark's predictable routine would bring him home soon, barring traffic on the 10. Her own breath sounded loud in the silent car. She watched a neighbor walk a small, prancing dog. A delivery van rumbled past, normal life continuing its placid flow around the abscess of her own. At 6:12 p.m. Mark's silver SUV turned onto their street. Her body went rigid. She watched him pull into the driveway, emerge with his laptop bag, and walk to the front door. He did not look around. He did not glance down the street. He entered his home, her home, and closed the door. A light went on in the living room. Erica's hands were cold on the steering wheel. This was the point of no return. If nothing happened, she would have spent a weekend in a motel for nothing, and would have to return to that house carrying a new, perhaps more terrible uncertainty. But the phone records were a drumbeat in her mind. The late-night calls, the shared glances, the hollow excuses. She waited. The minutes stretched, elastic and torturous. 6:36:45. The living room light cast a warm, golden rectangle onto the front patio. Then at 7:02 p.m. a familiar blue hatchback turned the corner. Erica's heart stopped, then resumed with a painful, hammering thud. Chloe's car. It slowed, then pulled into the driveway behind Mark's SUV, as naturally as if it belonged there. Which in a way it now did. Erica watched, a silent scream trapped in her throat, as Chloe got out. She was dressed casually in jeans and a soft-looking sweater, her hair down. She did not ring the bell. She went straight to the front door, and it opened before she could touch it, Mark's form a dark silhouette against the interior light. He stepped aside, she entered, and the door closed, swallowing them both. Erica stared at the closed door, the reality of it a physical blow to her solar plexus. The air left her lungs in a slow, soundless exhale. She had known intellectually for weeks, but knowing and seeing were continents apart. Seeing the car arrive, seeing her best friend enter her home with the unthinking ease of a resident, was a visceral, gutting confirmation that severed the last fragile thread of hope. She sat frozen, watching the house. For 10 minutes nothing changed. The living room light still glowed. She imagined them there on the sofa she had chosen, perhaps with a glass of the wine she had stocked, talking, laughing, touching. Then at 7:14 p.m. the living room light went out. The world narrowed to the dark rectangle of that window. A second later, a new light bloomed from the other side of the house. Upstairs, the soft, diffused glow of the bedroom. Their bedroom. The visual evidence was complete, a sequence of illuminated frames telling the oldest, cruelest story in the world. The living room dark, the bedroom lit. The symbolism was so blatant it felt like an insult. They weren't even trying to hide it. Not really, not from the one person they believed wasn't watching. The pain was a white-hot wire, threading from her chest down her arms to her trembling fingertips. A wave of nausea rose, bitter and acidic. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles ached, anchoring herself to the solidity of the car, to the fact of her own breathing. For a long time she did not move. She watched the bedroom light, imagining the scene behind the blinds. Every detail of that room assaulted her. The linen duvet cover she'd saved for, the art print they'd bought together at a flea market, the specific way the morning sun fell across the pillows. It was all being violated, rendered into a backdrop for their betrayal. The cold rage that had sustained her through the planning now surged, a cleansing, clarifying fire. The guilt over her own. Deception was ash in the wind. This was the truth. This was what they did when they thought she was gone. She had what she needed. The visual proof was seared into her retinas. She could drive away now, back to the motel, and begin the legal, practical unraveling. But it wasn't enough. The plan had a final, critical phase. She needed to see them. She needed to hear the tone of their voices in her home, to witness their comfort in her space, to make the abstract, visual fact a tangible, audible reality. She needed them to see her seeing them. Gathering her courage was like gathering broken glass. Every instinct screamed to flee, to protect herself from the direct impact. But a stronger, harder instinct demanded she walk into the heart of the ruin. She checked her pocket for the motel key card, a token of her other, temporary life. She took a deep, shuddering breath that did nothing to calm her. Then, moving with a stiffness that felt alien, she opened the car door and stepped out into the cool evening air. The walk down the sidewalk toward her own house was the longest journey of her life. Each step was a mile. The familiar sounds of the neighborhood, a distant lawnmower, the faint bass line of someone's music, felt like they were coming from another planet. Her focus was telescopic, narrowed to her front door, to the bedroom light glowing upstairs. She felt exposed, a ghost walking in plain sight, but no one noticed her. She was just a woman approaching a house. She reached the edge of her property. Instead of going to the front door, she slipped down the side passage, a narrow path of decomposed granite between the house and a tall fence. The succulents she had planted here were thriving, plump and geometric in the twilight. Her eyes scanned the cluster of pots. And there it was, the fake rock, slightly darker than the real stones, a little too perfectly oval. Her hand reached for it, cold and steady. It was lighter than a real stone. She turned it over and the small magnetic compartment opened. Inside, nestled in the grey foam, was the spare key. She took it, the metal cold against her palm. She returned the rock to its place, the act feeling both clandestine and absurdly normal. Key in hand, she stood at her own side gate, looking up at the house. The bedroom light still glowed. She could hear nothing from within. The back patio was dark. She moved to the kitchen's exterior door, the one that opened into the mudroom. This was it, the final threshold. Her hand rose, the key a tiny, cold weapon. She slid it into the lock. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. She pushed the door open, just a crack, and slipped inside her own home, a silent intruder in the museum of her broken life. The familiar scent of lemon cleaner and the faint, residual smell of Mark's coffee greeted her, a cruel mockery of welcome. She stood in the dark mudroom, listening, her every nerve ending alive to the sounds of the house, to the truth that was now just rooms away. The familiar hum of the refrigerator was the first sound that registered, a mundane baseline to the surreal horror of re-entering her own home as a trespasser. Erica stood frozen in the dark mudroom, the cool, smooth tile under her bare feet. She had slipped off her shoes outside. The air smelled of the lemon verbena candle she'd lit yesterday and something else, something faintly floral, Chloe's perfume, lingering in her hallway. From deeper within the house, voices filtered through the stillness, not from upstairs as she'd anticipated, but from the kitchen. They were low, urgent, a heated whisper argument that carried the intimate cadence of shared stress. She moved on silent feet, a ghost in her own corridors, drawn toward the sliver of light spilling from the kitchen doorway. The open-plan living area was dark, the furniture vague shapes in the gloom. She paused just outside the kitchen, her back pressed against the cool wall, hidden in shadow. The scene before her was illuminated under the bright, clinical light of the pendant lamps over the island, a stage set for the final act. They stood close together, not touching, but the space between them crackled with tension. Mark leaned against the counter, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his face drawn and pale. Chloe faced him, her back partly to Erica, one hand gripping the edge of the marble countertop as if for balance. She wore the soft sweater Erica had seen from the car. They were in the heart of Erica's domain, surrounded by the dishes she'd chosen, the cookbooks she curated, the herb garden she tended on the windowsill. "This is unsustainable," Chloe was whispering, her voice strained. "The lying is eating me alive. Every time she looks at me, I feel like she knows." "She doesn't know," Mark hissed back, but his voice lacked conviction. It was the voice of a man trying to convince himself. "We just have to be more careful. We knew it would be hard." "Careful," Chloe's whisper rose, sharp with frustration. "Mark, she's not an idiot. She's Erica. She sees things, the boutique, the phone calls. It's a miracle she hasn't confronted you already." "She asked about my mom," Mark said, running a hand through his hair in that familiar, stressed gesture that now looked like a cheap pantomime. "I gave her the cover. It worked. For how long? This double life, it's making me hate myself. And I hate what it's doing to her. We're hurting her every single day." The word hurting hung in the air, a tangible poison. Erica watched, her blood a cold river in her veins. This was not the passionate tryst she had imagined, but something in some ways worse. A domestic dispute about the logistics of their betrayal, a shared burden of guilt and stress played out over her kitchen island. It was intimacy of a profound and ugly kind. Mark's shoulders slumped. "I know, God, I know, but it just happened, Chloe. We didn't plan this. We didn't mean for any of this to hurt her." That was the phrase, the catalyst. It just happened. The three words that trivialized 1,000 acts of deception, that reduced her agony to an accident. A calm, terrifying clarity descended upon Erica, freezing the tremor in her hands, stilling the frantic beat of her heart. The observer stepped fully into the light. She moved from the shadows into the doorway, her silhouette long and stark against the dark living room. Both of them jerked as if electrocuted, whirling to face her. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth, a stifled gasp. Mark's face went from pale to ashen, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated shock. "Erica," he choked out. For a long moment there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the brutal, exposing light. Erica looked from one to the other, taking in the guilty tableau. Then she spoke, her voice not a scream but a flat, controlled instrument, colder than the marble counter. "It just happened," she echoed, the words dripping with quiet venom. "Like the late-night calls from your mother, Mark. The ones on the phone bill that always lasted 40 minutes and always went to Chloe's number." She saw the blood drain from his face. "Like Chloe's last-minute work crisis, the night my husband was whispering on the balcony about being careful." Like the two of you discovering the same boutique in Silver Lake independently. Like the shared glances at Liam's dinner party that had nothing to do with the story being told. She took a step forward, her gaze pinning Chloe. Or like your oddly cheerful cancellation for our movie night, Chloe, when you supposedly had a dawn shoot in Malibu. A shoot I checked on. The light that morning was flat grey, overcast. No photographer would book a sunrise catalogue shoot for that. You were here, weren't you? That night or one just like it. The timeline unspooled from her with lethal precision, each clue a hammer blow. She did not raise her voice. The calm was a weapon, making their panic seem hysterical by contrast. It just happened, she repeated, slicing through their stunned silence. Through all the planned cancellations, the deleted browser histories, the hundreds of texts, the secret language of looks in my living room. It just happened to weave a lie so complete you thought I'd never see the pattern. But I'm a designer. My job is to see the patterns you miss. Chloe was crying now, silent tears streaking her cheeks, but Erica felt no pity, only a distant, academic disgust. Mark found his voice a broken, pleading thing. Erica, please, it wasn't like that. We love you. This wasn't about not loving you. Don't, Erica cut him off, the single word a whip crack. Don't insult me further. This was about loving yourselves and your secret. This was about the thrill of the lie. Right here in the kitchen I cook your meals in. She looked around, her gesture encompassing the room. You picked my home for your confessionals. You picked my life to hollow out. The explosion was not of sound, but of truth, detonating in the bright, unforgiving light. Their tangled web of excuses shriveled under the focused heat of her evidence. They had no defense against the meticulous catalogue she presented. The confrontation was not a battle, it was a dissection. And as she stood there, dismantling their lies brick by stolen brick, Erica felt the final, terrible shift. The woman who had entered this house was gone. In her place stood someone new, forged in the fire of their betrayal, holding the shattered remains of her perfect picture, seeing it clearly for the first time. The truth, finally exposed, was uglier and simpler than she had ever imagined, and it left her standing alone in the devastating light, utterly, irrevocably free of them both. The silence after the door closed behind Mark was not a silence at all. It was a vacuum, a roaring absence that swallowed the echoes of his pleading, his half-formed justifications, the final, choked sound of his car engine starting and fading down the street. Erica stood in the center of the living room, the same spot where, minutes before, the truth had been dissected under the brutal kitchen lights. The air still vibrated with the shock of exposure, but now it was empty of them. She was alone, truly, utterly alone in the house that had been the stage for every act of the betrayal. Her phone, discarded on the sofa, lit up with a soft, persistent glow. She did not need to look to know it was Chloe. The notifications would be pleas, apologies, more tangled explanations that were just another layer of the lie. The light pulsed, a digital heartbeat from a severed limb. With a mechanical slowness that felt like moving through deep water, Erica picked up the phone. Her thumb moved over the screen, not to read the messages, but to navigate to Chloe's contact. The action required no thought, only a cold, final instinct. She tapped block this caller, then confirmed. The screen refreshed, the contact gone from her recent list. She did the same for Mark's number. The severance was clean, digital, and absolute. She turned the phone face down, its silence now complete. Then the structure holding her upright dissolved. The calm that had armored her during the confrontation shattered, and the delayed tsunami of feeling hit. It began as a tremor in her hands, a vibration that traveled up her arms and seized her entire frame. A sound escaped her, a raw, guttural gasp that was the prelude to the storm. She sank to her knees on the area rug, the wool rough against her skin, and the tears came. They were not gentle tears of sadness, but great heaving sobs that tore from her chest, violent and uncontrollable. She cried for the years of belief, for the inside jokes now rendered cruel, for the future plans that were ash. She cried for the loss of her best friend, a loss that felt like an amputation. She cried for the death of the man she had loved, for the stranger who had worn his face and broken his vows. The grief was a physical entity, racking her body, leaving her breathless and trembling on the floor of her hollowed-out life. When the sobs subsided into shuddering hiccups, a different heat ignited in her core. Anger, white-hot and purifying. She pushed herself up, her vision blurred, and stalked through the rooms. Her gaze fell on a framed photograph on the bookshelf, the three of them at a vineyard, arms slung around each other, smiles wide and unguarded. With a cry that was half scream, half roar, she snatched it up and hurled it against the stone fireplace. The glass exploded in a satisfying cascade of shards, the photo fluttering to the hearth like a wounded bird. She didn't stop. She swept a vase of dried eucalyptus from the console table, the brittle stems scattering like bones. She tore the throw pillows from the sofa and flung them across the room. The violence was cathartic, a physical manifestation of the internal wreckage. Exhaustion eventually claimed her, the fury burning out as quickly as it had flared. She slumped onto the bottom step of the staircase, her energy spent. The house was a mess of her own making now, a fitting reflection of the emotional chaos within. She sat there for a long time, staring at the wall opposite, at a small watercolor of the Santa Monica Pier she had painted years ago. The colors were soft, the memory of the day gentle. It belonged to a different person in a different universe. She gave herself permission to stop, to not clean up the broken glass, to not answer the door if it rang, to not think about lawyers or separation or practicalities. For one full day, this house would be a museum of her broken life, and she would be its sole, grieving curator. She would feel everything without judgment or agenda. She moved through the hours in a daze. She drank water straight from the kitchen tap, not bothering with a glass. She found a bag of pretzels in the pantry and ate them mechanically, tasting nothing. She wandered from room to room, touching objects as if seeing them for the first time. The book on Mark's nightstand, a thriller he would never finish. The specific brand of hair conditioner Chloe always used, left in the guest bathroom from her last, innocent stay. The cozy armchair by the window where Erica had spent so many contented evenings, now feeling like a prop in her abandoned play. As afternoon faded into evening, she returned to the living room, avoiding the glittering field of glass. She curled into a corner of the large sofa, pulling a blanket over herself that still smelled faintly of Mark's sandalwood soap. She stared at the blank black screen of the television, seeing not her reflection, but a montage of ghosts. Mark's guilty silhouette on the balcony, Chloe's panicked eyes in the coffee shop, their shocked faces in the kitchen light. The images played on a loop, each one a twist of the knife. The depth of the betrayal unfolded in layers, each more devastating than the last. It wasn't just the physical act, the clandestine meetings. It was the 1,000 daily betrayals, the shared secrets that excluded her, the private jokes at her expense, the comfort they took in each other while offering her the hollow shell of their attention. They had used her trust as the canvas for their deception, her loyalty as the cover for their affair. They had made her home her sanctuary, the venue for their duplicity. The violation was total, encompassing her past, present, and imagined future. Darkness fell. She did not turn on the lights. The street lamps cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor. In the profound quiet, a strange, numb acceptance began to seep into the spaces carved out by grief and rage. The truth, however horrific, was now hers. The not knowing was over. The exhausting vigilance, the constant analysis, the dread, it was all finished. They were gone. The house was silent. She was alone, yes, but she was no longer living in the poisonous fog of their lie. She was in the clear, cold air of the aftermath. It was a desolate landscape, scorched and barren, but it was real. And for now, that was the only solace she could find, the terrible, aching reality of the ashes in which she sat, utterly still, and began, for the first time, to process the cataclysm that had obliterated her world. Practicalities, cold and insistent, began to pierce the fog of grief around the third day. The silence of the house, once a suffocating presence, became a canvas for the next, unavoidable steps. The emotional storm had left a debris field, but beneath the shattered glass and upended pillows, the structure of a life needed dismantling. Erica moved through the rooms with a new, grim purpose. She cleaned up the broken picture frame, sweeping the shards into a dustpan, the photograph of the 3 smiling faces deposited into the trash without a second glance. Order was a feeble defense against chaos, but she rebuilt it shelf by shelf, surface by surface, as if tidying the physical space could impose a semblance of control on the wreckage within. The first concrete action was the lawyer. Sitting at her cleared desk, she researched family law attorneys in Los Angeles, her designer's eye critiquing website aesthetics while her mind recoiled from the terminology. Dissolution of marriage, marital assets, separate maintenance. She chose a firm with a reputation for being methodical and unsentimental. The call was a study in clinical detachment. She stated the facts. Her husband of 7 years had an affair with her best friend. She had witnessed it. She wanted to initiate separation proceedings. The paralegal's voice was professionally soothing, scheduling a consultation. Hanging up, Erica felt a strange hollowing out. The machinery of the end was now engaged. a process that would reduce the intricate, painful tapestry of her marriage to a series of forms and financial disclosures. It was necessary, but it felt like translating a symphony into a spreadsheet. With the legal wheels turning, she turned her attention to the house itself, to the physical artifacts of the shared life that now felt like exhibits in a museum of falsehood. She brought empty cardboard boxes up from the garage, their crisp, unbent corners a promise of erasure. She started in the living room, the heart of their shared comfort. From the bookshelf, she removed framed photographs one by one. Their wedding day, Mark's face beaming as he lifted her veil, a gesture she now saw as a prelude to a different kind of unveiling. A camping trip in Big Sur, Chloe making a silly face by the campfire, an arm slung around Erica's shoulders. A holiday dinner, all of them wearing paper crowns. Each image was a fossil from an extinct era. She did not look at them for long. She placed them carefully in a box, faces down, layering them like sedimentary rock, and sealed the tape with a sharp, final hiss. The task was methodical, almost meditative. She boxed up gifts they had given her, a delicate necklace from Mark, a coffee table book on mid-century design from Chloe. These objects, once infused with love, were now inert, their meaning voided. She cleared the guest bathroom of Chloe's leftover conditioner and a spare toothbrush. She packed away the silly mug Chloe had bought her that read "World's Okayest Designer," a joke that now felt like a subtle dig. Each item removed was a thread pulled from the tangled knot, a slight loosening of the bonds that choked her. Then, in the bottom drawer of her own desk, she found it. A birthday card from 2 years prior, the cover a vibrant, abstract splash of watercolor. She remembered the birthday well, a surprise dinner at her favorite Italian place, arranged by Mark with Chloe's help. She had felt so cherished, so securely anchored in their dual devotion. She opened the card. Her own name was written in Mark's familiar, architect's block print, "To Erica, the light of my life. All my love forever, Mark," beneath it in Chloe's looping. Energetic script, "To my soul sister, happy birthday, so much love, Chloe." The card fell from her hands as if it had burned her. She stared at it where it lay open on the floor, the two signatures side by side, a perfect bitter artifact. Their declarations of love, pennied in the same moment, from the same celebratory dinner, now revealed not as separate devotions, but as a single, coordinated performance. They had stood together, perhaps in this very room, and conspired to write these words, this shared fiction of pure, uncomplicated love for her. The card was no longer a memento of affection. It was evidence of the conspiracy, a receipt for the emotional fraud perpetrated against her. The forever and the so much love were lies, inscribed in ink, making the betrayal feel not like a passionate lapse, but a cold, sustained enterprise. She picked it up, not with rage, but with a weary revulsion, and dropped it into the growing box of discards, where it landed atop the smiling photographs, the final, poignant layer in the coffin of her old life. The process of untangling was exhausting, a daily excavation. She changed the passwords on all her shared accounts. She began the laborious task of separating finances, opening a new bank account with only her name. She notified their mutual friends, a task she approached with terse, factual messages that brooked no discussion. "Mark and I are separating. I won't be discussing details. I appreciate your respect for my privacy during this time." The responses flooded in shock, support, awkward condolences, but she engaged with none of them. Her social world, once a warm network, was now a minefield of potential pity and unanswerable questions. She began to sleep in the guest room, unable to bear the memory-laden space of the master bedroom. The new room was smaller, impersonal, a blank cell. She lay awake in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house at night from this new vantage point. The untangling was not just logistical, it was psychic. She had to separate her memories, her habits, her very identity from the fused entity of Mark and Erica, and the triangulated ghost of Mark, Chloe, and Erica. It was like trying to unbake a cake, to isolate the flour from the sugar, the egg from the butter. Some bonds, she realized, were chemical. They had changed her composition, and that change was permanent. She could remove the artifacts, but the imprint of their presence, the shape of the loss, was carved into the substrate of who she was. Yet, with each box taped shut, each account separated, each silent night endured in the spare room, she felt a minute, almost imperceptible shift. The unbearable weight of the shared life was being parceled out, discarded, or claimed solely as her own. The house, though still filled with the architecture of their marriage, began to feel less like a shrine to the betrayal, and more like a territory she was slowly, painfully reclaiming, inch by liberated inch. The process was brutal, and it was far from over. But in the act of untangling, she was performing the first essential surgery on her own future, cutting away the necrotic tissue of their we to see what, if anything, remained of I. The light in the new apartment was different. It was a north-facing light, cool and diffuse, lacking the golden, sentimental glow of the old living room window. It fell in clean, geometric shapes across the bare hardwood floor, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the silent air. Erica stood in the center of the empty living area, a single cardboard box at her feet marked Desk Essentials. The space was small, a studio with a sleeping alcove, but its very emptiness was a balm. There were no ghosts here. No shared furniture held memories in its grain, no art on the walls whispered of collective taste. This was a blank canvas, and the emptiness was not a void, but a promise of potential, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Several months had passed since the cataclysm in the kitchen. The divorce proceedings were a slow, bureaucratic river grinding toward an inevitable sea. The house was sold, the proceeds split with a cold finality that felt more like a business dissolution than the end of a marriage. She had taken only what was unequivocally hers. Her design equipment, her books, her clothes, and a few curated boxes of pre-Mark memorabilia that felt like artifacts from a distant, simpler civilization. Everything else, the sofa, the dining table, the bed, had been consumed by the sale or donated, shed like a skin. She had thrown herself into her work with a ferocious intensity. Creativity, once a sanctuary, had become a lifeline, a world where she maintained absolute sovereignty. She took on complex branding projects, losing herself for hours in the logic of grids, the psychology of color, the architecture of user interfaces. Here, her observational nature was a superpower again, not a curse. She could spot the misaligned element, feel the dissonant note in a visual hierarchy, and correct it with a click. The screen was a realm of solvable problems, of cause and effect, where effort yielded a tangible, beautiful result. It was the antithesis of the emotional quagmire she had escaped. Late nights in the glow of her monitor, with only the hum of her laptop and the distant sigh of city traffic, became a new kind of peace, a peace built on solitude and control. Relearning the world beyond her screen was a slower, more tentative process. Her social landscape had been scorched earth. The mutual friends, though well-meaning, felt like citizens of a country whose language she no longer spoke. Their lives continued in coupled bliss, their conversations laced with domestic references that were landmines. She politely declined invitations, needing the clean air of isolation to let her wounds scar over. The first foray out was with Lena, an old college friend who had never been part of the Chloe orbit. They had kept in touch sporadically over the years, their connection based on shared history rather than intertwined daily lives. The proposed coffee felt like a diplomatic mission into a foreign, benign land. Sitting across from Lena in a sun-drenched cafe in Echo Park, Erica found herself oddly nervous, her social muscles atrophied from disuse and suspicion. Lena talked about her work in non-profit fundraising, about her aging cat's thyroid medication, about her recent attempt to grow tomatoes on a fire escape. The topics were mundane, safe, and blessedly free of subtext. Erica listened, nodding, sipping her oat milk latte. When Lena asked, "So, how are you really?" the question was gentle, without agenda. Erica paused, the familiar walls of defensiveness rising on instinct. But Lena's gaze held no pity, just a quiet, patient curiosity. "I'm rebuilding," Erica said finally, the word feeling both accurate and inadequate. "Day by day, it's quiet." "Quiet can be good," Lena offered, and then seamlessly pivoted to a story about a disastrous grant proposal. The conversation flowed without pressure, a gentle stream that asked nothing of her but her presence. Erica realized with a shock of relief that she was not scanning Lena's words for hidden meanings, not monitoring her micro-expressions for signs of deceit. The interaction was exactly what it appeared to be. Two acquaintances reconnecting over coffee. The simplicity was almost dizzying. She had forgotten how to socialize without the background hum of vigilance, without the constant, subconscious audit for betrayal. Relearning it felt like learning to walk on a leg that had been in a cast, awkward, uncertain, but fundamentally possible. Afterward, walking back to her apartment, Erica reflected on the weaponization of her trust. It had been her greatest strength, the foundation upon which she had built her life. She had given it freely, generously to Mark and Chloe, and they had used it as the perfect camouflage. Her trust had been the darkness in which their secret thrived, the blanket under which they hid their lies. They had counted on its permanence, its blindness. Uncovering the truth had required her to turn that trust inward, to trust the evidence of her own eyes and the cold logic of data over the warm, familiar narrative of their love. It had been a violent act of self-preservation, a betrayal of her own nature in order to save herself from theirs. Yet, in the cool afternoon light, she also recognized her own strength in that uncovering. The meticulous mind that had catalogued the clues, the courage that had planned and executed the sting, the brutal clarity with which she had confronted them. These were not the actions of a victim, but of a survivor. She had been an archaeologist of her own betrayal, brushing away the dust of their lies to reveal the ugly truth beneath. It was a horrible thing to have to do, but she had done it. She had looked directly into the heart of the deception and had not looked away. That strength, forged in the fire of their duplicity, was now a part of her, a core of steel wrapped in the still tender flesh of grief. Back in her empty apartment, she opened the desk essentials box. She unpacked her tablet, her favorite pens, a small, smooth stone she'd found on a beach years ago. She placed them on the raw wooden desk she'd assembled herself, positioning them just so. The north light fell across the arrangement, clean and clarifying. This was her new draft. The previous version of her life, the one with the loving husband and the sisterly best friend, had been permanently deleted, its files corrupted beyond recovery. This was a fresh document, a new file with her name on it. The page was terrifyingly blank, but for the first time in a long time, the blankness did not represent an absence. It represented a choice. Every word, every line, every element of the composition would be hers alone. The trust she had once bestowed so freely was now a guarded resource, but the strength she had discovered was a permanent asset. She was the author, the designer, and the sole inhabitant of this new, quiet space. The story was far from over, but the narrative at last was entirely her own. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, carried by the same postal worker who delivered bills and catalogues. It was thin, legal-sized, with the return address of her attorney's firm in crisp black type. Erica took it from the mailbox in the lobby of her apartment building, her fingers registering the weight of a few sheets of paper that contained the formal end of a 7-year chapter. She carried it upstairs, the envelope feeling neither heavy nor light, just present, a final administrative fact. In the cool, north light of her apartment, she placed it on the raw wood of her desk. She made a cup of tea, the ritual deliberate, giving herself time. The apartment was quiet, a silence she had grown accustomed to, one that no longer felt like absence but like space. She sat, smoothed her hand over the envelope's surface, and then slid a thumb under the flap. The tier was clean. Inside were the final divorce papers. The language was dense, legalese rendering the collapse of a shared dream into clauses about asset division, waiver of spousal support, and the restoration of her maiden name. Erica Adams. Her eyes scanned the lines, not reading every word but absorbing the finality of it. There were no surprises. The negotiations, such as they were, had been clinical, mediated through lawyers. Mark, through his attorney, had not contested anything. The capitulation felt less like remorse and more like exhaustion, a desire to be free of the mess he had made. She found the flagged signature lines. One for him, already signed with his familiar, blocky autograph, and one for her, blank. She took her favorite pen from the ceramic cup on her desk, a precise drafting pen with archival black ink. She clicked it open. The sound was loud in the quiet room. This was the moment. She had imagined it in the early, raw days as a moment of triumph or of devastating sorrow. But as she positioned the pen tip above the line, she felt neither. What flowed through her was a quiet, solemn gravity, a moment of pure, unadorned closure. She signed her name, Erica Adams. The ink was dark and sure on the bright white paper. It was not a celebration. It was an acknowledgement, a formal legal period placed at the end of a long, run-on sentence of betrayal and grief. She felt the finality of it settle into her bones, a subtle internal click, like a door locking not with a slam, but with a smooth, irrevocable turn of a well-made key. She allowed herself then to remember, not the lies, not the confrontation, not the hollow center of those last terrible months, but the good times, the early, sun-drenched Saturdays at the farmer's market with Mark, his hand warm in hers, the helpless, tear-streaming laughter with Chloe over a shared joke no one else understood, the feeling of belonging, of being part of a perfect, inviolable triangle. The memories rose, vivid and sweet, and she let them come. She did not push them away as poisoned. They were real. The joy in them had been real. That was the cruelest and most important truth. The foundation of the lie had been genuine love, which made its corruption all the more devastating, but which also meant her grief was not for a fantasy, but for something true that had died. She held the memories in her mind's eye, examining them like precious, fractured artifacts. She did not let them